Kicking off the list at number 10, rocket roulette. Okay, remember May 2021, like not that long ago at all, when a large piece of space junk was about to crash land somewhere on Earth and we had no idea where it was gonna hit? Well, where did it land? At the time, this was one of the biggest pieces of human-made space junk to ever crash towards Earth. They said it would land in New York or New Zealand. Okay, that's not concerning at all. The debris came from the Long March 5B rocket and it landed in the Indian Ocean, with most of it burning up upon re-entry. Usually when rockets discard pieces, it's done so strategically, falling into the ocean, normally the Atlantic. This was not supposed to happen. Thankfully it didn't land in New York. It would have been an Avengers level threat. Imagine if that happened. Oh my god, that'd be so scary. Number 9, Hodge's meteorite. These happen pretty often, but luckily most of the time it doesn't wipe out everybody or everything. Sorry dinosaurs, but you took one for the team. Thanks. Back in 1954, residents in Talladega County, Alabama, noticed a ball of fire heading towards them. See, we didn't have Twitter back then. We couldn't warn people that a meteor was maybe gonna wipe us out. We also didn't really know how to tell if meteorites were coming back then, with technology being a little, old. So it was alarming, especially for Anne Elizabeth Hodges, who got hit by that space rock. Yeah, she got hit by a meteorite. I can't even get hit by a paintball without complaining and taking the day off work, let alone a space rock. That's insane. You may be asking, was she outside doing Pilates? Was she stargazing? Nope, she was napping in her living room and an 8-pound chunk of meteorite smashed through her roof and then grazed her hip. She got hit by a space rock and received just a bruise. First human to ever get hit by a meteorite. What a flex. Number 8, iguanas. Okay, we're dipping into the weird side of this list. Here we go. Back in 2018, Florida got another odd headline. This time it was frozen iguanas falling from the skies. They got hit with their biggest snowfall in 28 years, so these cold-blooded dudes started falling from suburban tree branches. People were just walking to get groceries, trying to, make it through this harsh winter, and iguanas are freezing and falling off trees in front of them. There's just like 4 lying in a backyard. The crazy thing is they're not dead, they're actually just paralyzed. So they come back to life later. Officials were calling for residents to not touch them or pick them up. Like, hey, sorry I can't make it, there's a frozen iguana sleeping on my car. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, I gotta wait this one out. Number 7, golf balls. Heading over to Florida yet again. September 1st, 1969, nice. A rainstorm started to turn heads. Sometimes large hail is described as a golf ball, right? It's golf ball sized hail. Well, this time it was actually raining golf balls. Literally. Dozens of golf balls fell from the sky and we never really figured out where they came from. Of course, being Florida, there's many golf courses around, but none of them could claim the golf balls. So the most realistic explanation is that a local pond had these piled up over time, then this storm, this water spout came through, sucked up everything, and then just hucked golf balls around town. Florida's western Gulf Coast, more like Florida's western Gulf Coast, am I right? I'll walk my way out, that's fine. Number 6, a massive meteorite. Getting a bit more cosmic in our list again, we have the Jinlin meteorite. This week, NASA launched a $330 million mission just to see if they can successfully knock an asteroid off its course. It's not heading for Earth, just to be clear, they just want to test this out. So something for sure is coming, that's what I'm gathering here. This is a huge test for just, we'll see what happens, just some space pool. Back in 1766, a meteorite did hit Earth. It pierced through China's northeast sky, and then it exploded, broke apart into a few pieces, and hit the ground. The largest piece is now on display in the Jinlin Meteorite Museum in Jinlin City. It's called Meteorite 1. It's massive. Number 5, mud. Mud spas are so hot right now. Exfoliates your dead skin cells, prevents eczema, relieves arthritis pain. Some decent benefits there. But when you don't know you're about to be covered in mud and then you're absolutely covered in mud, it can be jarring. Back in 1902, dust clouds in Illinois were so bad that when they were blown over to New York or New Jersey, the storm there turned that dust into mud. So for just a few minutes only, thankfully, mud rained down all over poor civilians. The event was hilariously described. People were outside wearing their old-timey 1902 outfits, and then they got drenched in mud out of nowhere. Clothes hanging out to dry, absolutely wrecked. The mud storm went for 40 miles, mucking up everyone and everything in its path. I just know there was an outdoor wedding during this and no one wants to talk about it. Number 4, boiled bats. This is some Tim Burton level shit right here. I felt sick writing this, I'm not gonna lie. Sorry, bat lovers. January 2018, hundreds of bats started falling from the skies and trees. They were falling all over Australia, Campbelltown. See, there was a brutal heat wave happening, so these bats, a species called Pteropus poliocephalus, they're normally good with heat. They can handle 30 degrees Celsius, then anything over that, their brains start to get all loopy. The colony manager for the Campbelltown bats made a statement about the apocalyptic site, saying that they basically boiled on the inside. There were about 200 dead bats found that day, and honestly, I couldn't imagine seeing that. At least those iguanas from Florida came back to life. these poor things just stayed dead. Number 3. Spiders. I've been talking about spiders lately on this channel, so I figured I would tell you the worst spider story that I've ever read. Australia 2015, again, Australia, back on its bullshit. Millions of tiny spiders started to fall from the sky. This phenomenon is called spider rain or angel hair. I like spider rain more, to be honest. It kind of gets to the punch quicker. Angel hair, that's something I want to check out. Absolutely not. Don't go outside when this happens. These showers happen when millions of spiders all balloon at the same time, depending on the season. So they climb trees, then they stick their ass out, and then they parachute across town onto your lap. You can't see them because they're tiny and there's millions of them and they're flying above us, but they're happening all the time. Sometimes these guys land in heavily populated areas, and let me tell you, if I was vacationing in Australia and it began to rain spiders, I would write a formal complaint. I would be upset. No, it's even more gross than that. Number 2, beef. Yep, flakes of beef were falling from the sky. That's so gross. How, Taylor? Tell us how this happened. Well, 1876, there was a small window where a field in Bath County, Kentucky got a meat storm. Yeah, we're gonna call it a meat storm. That sounds perfect for what it is, honestly. They have no idea where this came from still today, or if it was even meat. That's pretty gross. They had 3 dudes just stand outside like with their tongue out like it's a winter wonderland, and they couldn't decide if it was bear meat. They thought it might have been buzzard barf or bacteria from jellyfish that made its way into town and into the air. If you ever think it's raining meat, don't eat it. The Kentucky meat shower is still a mystery, and you know what? Let's not solve it. I'm good with that. Finally, number 1, treasure. The best for last, and you know what? I didn't make it fucking disgusting. You're welcome. Back in June 1940, the Russian villain of Meschera had a lucky rainfall. Coins from the 16th century began raining down. What a scene. Sometimes it rains iguanas that are frozen, other times it's literal treasure. It came from an undisclosed treasure trove that was buried close by, and a storm lifted the newly exposed treasure into the sky. Thank you, soil erosion. Imagine getting hit with a 16th century coin. That would for sure leave a mark. You'd have to pay your medical bills by using the coin that hit you. Full circle, that would be nuts.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the telephone cats. Sorry to all the cat people out there, this one is not going to be for you. In 1929, 2 scientists at Princeton University wanted to conduct an experiment in order to test how auditory nerves perceive sound. This is obviously extremely important research, but the way they went about it is truly messed up. They took a sedated but alive cat and cut out parts of its brain. They then attached one end of a telephone wire to the cat's auditory nerve and then the other end to a receiver. When one of these scientists spoke into the cat's ear, the other one could hear it on the other end. This is very cool, but most definitely not an excuse to do something so inhumane. There were benefits of this experiment, of course, and it is believed that this may have helped lead to the development of cochlear implants, which is of course an incredibly important scientific advancement. The worst part, however, while the cat actually survived this experiment, instead of treating it like a king for the rest of its life, like it truly deserved, these scientists instead killed it just to see if the experiment would still work on a dead cat. It didn't. In our number 9 spot today, we have Bobby, Eddie, and David. When Bobby Shafran was just 19 years old, he found out he had a twin, a brother named Eddie. The 2 men were raised separately because they had been adopted at birth into different households. Not too long after finding out about each other, things took an even crazier twist when Bobby and Eddie found out that they had a triplet, another brother named David. What should have been a very joyous reunion for the triplets turned very dark when they began to uncover the truth about what happened and why they had spent all those years not knowing the others existed. As it turns out, they found out that they were forced to be subjects in an experiment that they had no idea was taking place. Peter Neubauer was a child psychiatrist who wanted to study nature versus nurture, but decided to do it in the most cruel and unethical way. He believed that twins or triplets had a better chance of thriving if they were separated from their twin, and wanted to prove this by unknowingly separating twins from each other at birth. Luckily, Bobby, Eddie, and David all found each other, and their story is documented in the movie 3 Identical Strangers. In our number 8 spot today, we have isolation. In the 1950s, Donald Hebb, who was a professor of psychology at McGill University in Montreal, began a study to see how sensory isolation affects humans. He gave male graduate students $20 a day to stay in small rooms with basically only a bed in them. They had little human contact, only when being given food and when being led to the bathrooms. They also took it a step further and had U-shaped pillows to cover their ears to block out noise, as well as gloves to limit their sense of touch. Every person in the experiment experiment said that they found their thinking and thought processes were affected as they couldn't focus on any one thing before, but I'm glad that they got them all out of there and stopped the research right there. In our number 7 spot today we have the CRISPR babies. This is probably the most well-known case of human genetic engineering, and probably not for the right reasons. On November 25th, 2018, He Jiankui, who was a biophysics researcher, announced here on YouTube that his team had successfully created the world's first genome-edited babies. These babies, Lulu and Nana, were born from genetically modified embryos that had been made to be resistant to HIV. Here's the thing, no one is arguing about whether or not this could potentially be an amazing thing for people. Of course, if it works, this is a monumental scientific advancement. The argument is about whether or not it is ethically correct to genetically modify a human before they're really even able to be a human yet, especially when the potential risks and long-term effects of this kind were completely unknown. Again, it's not about what this is aiming to do, it just boils down to a lack of consent, especially on something that could have been lethal in the worst case scenario. This study also was conducted without the public discussion of the scientific community, which again is the source of quite a bit of controversy. In the end, he ended up being sentenced to jail time as well as being forced to pay a fine. 2 others he worked alongside were also found guilty for having, quote, forged ethical review documents and misled doctors into unknowingly implanting gene-edited embryos into 2 women. At the end of the day, scientific advancements are very cool and very exciting and very important, but not at the cost of doing the right thing the right way. In our number 6 spot today we have the Stanford Prison Experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment is one of the most famous examples of a sort of experiment gone wrong situation. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it started on August 14th, 1971, and it was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. The experiment took student volunteers and divided them into 2 groups, one group of prisoners and one group of guards, and they placed all the volunteers into a fake prison that was created for the experiment. The experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would turn evil under the right conditions and with the right amount of power. Basically, it was a test to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. I think everyone was shocked with the result. After just 6 days, the experiment needed to be concluded because the guards began absolutely tormenting the prisoners. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of even after such a short time. In our number 5 spot today we have Masha and Dasha Kryoslyapova. Masha and Dasha were conjoined twins who were taken from their mother and were subjected to a series of horrible medical experiments. Because of the fact that they shared a blood system but had separate nervous systems, they were ideal candidates for this research, although they certainly never should have been forced into it at all. Some things they did to the twins was force them into staying awake and seeing their reactions to sleep deprivation. They starved them at some points and even burnt and froze them to see what would happen during these intense temperature changes. They would poke one twin with needles to see if it affected the other one, and submerge one into ice cold water and check the temperature of the other twin. The twins spent the rest of their lives having a pretty toxic dynamic, I'm sure in part due to the trauma they shared together as a result of these terrible experiments. The twins passed away in 2003 at the age of 53, and they were the oldest living conjoined twins at the time of their passing. In our number 4 spot today we have the Undead. Alright, we had one that was bad for the cat lovers, and this time, I'm sorry dog lovers, but this one isn't gonna be up your alley. If you've seen The Walking Dead or really any zombie anything, you'll wonder why anyone was ever conducting this experiment at all. A team of Russian scientists released a video in which they showed a few dog heads that were being kept alive by an artificial blood circulation system. In the video, scientists used a heart-lung machine and were able to show the dog heads responding to sound. They would wiggle their ears, blink their eyes, and sometimes they were even able to lick their mouths. In 2005, for some reason, American scientists began trying to recreate this horrifying experiment. They flushed out all of the blood from a dog and replaced it with oxygen and sugar saline. Just 3 hours after this, and after a blood transfusion and an electric shock, the dog was somehow brought back from the dead. I truly wish I knew the purpose of this experiment, but I think I mostly just wish it never occurred at all. In our number 3 spot today we have Britches. Britches is a perfect example of a horrifying experiment done on an animal for human gain. Basically, researchers wanted to test out brain-implanted sonar devices in an attempt to create something that would be an asset to people without sight. There have been people without sight in the past, and I'm sure also the present, who've been able to develop a sort of like echolocation type skill where by clicking their tongue or making other sounds, they're able to map out their surroundings. Such a cool thing, and having a scientific advancement or the technology to help with this process should be an amazing thing, and it definitely is, until this experiment takes a very dark turn, and this is where Britches comes in. Britches was a monkey who did have his sight, but in order to test the efficacy of this device, they needed a monkey without sight. Instead of finding a monkey without sight, which has to exist somewhere, they just took Britches away, and they did this by sewing his perfectly healthy eyes shut. This experiment was undoubtedly helpful in the scientific process, but it should never be at this kind of cost. It is pretty clear that Britches most definitely did not deserve that kind of treatment at all. In our number 2 spot today, we have THN-1412. In 2007, there began the trial of a newer drug called THN-1412 that was intended to be used to treat leukemia. It is normal for a new drug to have gone through an animal testing phase prior to being tested on humans, and this one was no different. This drug had only been tested in animals prior to this, but the animal trials were very successful, so it was dubbed safe to begin testing in human trials. To start off with, the humans were first given a dose that was 500 times lower than the dose that was given to animals, just to play things as safe as possible. Unfortunately, however, although they did take every step they could and truly were being as safe as they could, these precautions did not seem to be enough, as this that had undergone all of the necessary pre-trial steps ended up being catastrophic once humans became involved. This drug began to cause organ failure in those who had even had a tiny dose of it. I'm not sure if there would have been a way to know this prior to this terrible event, or if this is just one of those terrible caveats to the trial testing process, but this is truly a horrifying outcome that I don't think anyone intended. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. In the years between 1932 and 1972, there were 399 black impoverished farmers in Tuskegee, Alabama, who all had syphilis, who were recruited to participate in a free program. They were told that the program would help them treat their ailment, but of course, that never happened. The experiment was conducted by people who were trying to see what would happen if the disease went untreated. Instead of treating the men with penicillin, which was the recommended treatment at the time, the men received aspirin and mineral supplements as placebos. And while this experiment was conducted to try and understand what effect the spread of the disease had on the body, the unethical considerations of the scientists who conducted it proved to be absolutely fatal and just downright cruel. Out of the 399, 28 of them passed away from the disease directly, 100 passed away from complications related to the disease, 40 spouses became infected, which was then passed on to 19 others at birth whose parents had been infected. This whole situation truly is one of those times where you stop and wonder how these things were ever treated as acceptable, and really hope that things have changed for good.
Number 10. Click, click, slide. One night in a small town not too far from where you are now, a woman, Sally, was late to pick up her daughter from a school basketball game. The reason she was late was because she'd stopped to get a manicure and long new acrylic nails put on at the salon. While she was rushing to the school, her car stalled out on the train tracks, and suddenly she saw a bright light and heard the train's horn as it collided with her car. The car was destroyed, and the only piece of her body that was found were her legs. The whole town was abuzz the next day with the mystery of what had happened, but at 6:30, the same time the train killed Sally, all of the young people in the town heard 3 strange noises. Click, click, slide, over and over again. It seemed to move all the way from one side of town to the other, from the train tracks to the school. Originally, people were wary of what was going on, so they walked together in groups, but every night they heard it. Click, click, slide. And after a while, the townspeople were terrified, and no one went outside alone after dark, especially if you weren't a grown-up. One night, young Emma was sitting in her living room with her mother when her mom asked her, "Emma, I haven't been feeling well. Would you go to the store and pick up some medicine for me?" Emma looked worried and said, "But Mom, it's almost 6:30. And her mother shrugged it off, saying it's just an old story and that she needed to grow up. So off Emma went to the store, but on her way back, as night fell, sure enough she heard the noise. Click, click, slide, click, click, slide, and she looked behind her but saw nothing. She quickened her pace as she walked home, and behind her, getting louder, click, click, slide. And as she got closer to home, the sounds were practically in her ear. Click, click, slide. And as she reached her front door, she turned around to see the mangled torso of a woman dragging herself with her long nails along the ground towards her. Click, click, slide. Emma pounded on the door and begged to be let inside, but her mother had locked the door and fallen asleep. And behind her, louder than ever, she heard click, click, slide. The next morning, the mother couldn't find Emma, and when she opened the front door to look for her, all that she saw was a trail of blood going down the stairs, and a message scrawled in blood on the front steps that read, "Why didn't you open the door, Mother?" I can already imagine the special effects makeup on Sally. Number 9. The Keyhole. Our next tale is a bit more simple and would be some slow build horror for sure, but some of my favorite scary movies are like that. A man comes into town on business. All of the hotels in the area are booked up for the holidays, so he decides to check into a less than savory hotel, as it's the only one with a vacancy sign on. When the front desk worker gives him his key, she says that on his floor there is a locked room with no number on it, and that he must stay out of it at all costs. Agreeing, he heads to his room, and as he does, he walks by the room with no number. He almost knocks, but decides against it and goes to bed. The next night, as he's returning to his room, he walks by the door and sees that the keyhole is rather wide, as though the lock was from a very long time ago. And he crouches down and looks inside. He sees a room much like his own, but in the back corner, there's a woman with skin as white as snow, crying with her head against the wall. He almost knocks, but decides against it. The next night, the man decides to look through the keyhole one more time to check on the woman, but all he sees when he looks through is the color red. She must have blocked the door with a red scarf or tape or something, he thinks to himself. When he checks out, he confesses to the front desk worker that he'd looked through the keyhole into the room. She sighs and tells him that they don't rent the room anymore because a man murdered his wife in there many years ago, and when the police found her body, she'd been strangled and beaten so hard that her eyes had filled with blood, and they turned completely red. Number 8. The King of Hearts. Modern playing cards are filled with meanings and symbols based in truth, like the 4 suits being representative of the 4 seasons, or the 52 cards representing the number of weeks in the year, and the kings are all based on real rulers, and the King of Hearts represents the emotionally disturbed Charles VII of France. King Charles fell ill near the end of his life, and it was at this time that he became obsessed with numerology and playing cards, as he knew his face was already immortalized in their ink. He began to obsess over the fact that the king was the 13th card of any suit, and that it would bring him terrible misfortune. He started to see the number everywhere, and it eventually drove him mad. One day, one of his butlers went to the king's room to feed him, and found King Charles wielding a sword, proclaiming that the cards have shown me the truth of 13, and it's not meant for mortal eyes. And he then thrust the sword into the left side of his head, and it came out on the other side. His playing card was changed to depict the grisly way he died, and check for yourself. On many decks of cards, the King of Hearts has a sword in the left side of his head. It's even creepier that he chose to end his life on 7/6/1462, with 7 and 6 making 13 and the numbers of the year also adding up to 13. Makes you wonder if the number really did have some strange power. Number 7. The Cremation of Sam McGee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge where I cremated Sam McGee. This is the beginning of one of my most favorite poems of all time. Written by Robert W. Service, this creepy poem tells the story of 2 men who are on an Arctic expedition, and unfortunately, Sam passes away from the cold. The poem follows Sam's friend's journey, bringing his frozen dead body through the ice and snow to fulfill Sam's last wish, to be cremated, so that he could feel like he's warm and back at home in the South one last time. I won't spoil the rest, but I believe that there's enough of a story to make a movie here. To be following one man's struggle through the Arctic to see his friend's dying wish come true would be a pretty compelling film, not to mention the unexpected twists. Johnny Cash actually does a fantastic reading of it if you're so inclined to listen. Number 6. A Ride Home. Now there are many different versions of this story, and some of them have been documented in real life by real people. One version is called The Witch of White Rock Lake. Another is called The Lady in White, but as the story goes, one night a woman was driving home after a long night shift, and due to some rain, the main road was out, so she needed to take a detour down an old dirt road that goes by the lake. As she's driving, she suddenly sees a woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the road. She stops the car, and as the woman in white approaches, she sees that they are absolutely drenched, head to toe. The woman comes to the window and, weeping, she asks for a ride home, saying that her boat capsized on the lake and that she needs to get home to her family. The driver says, "Of course, get in and tell me where you need to go." The lady in white gets in the back seat and gives her an address. It's not too far from where they are now, and they drive off into the night. After a little while, the driver asks for some clarification on the directions, but when she turns around, the woman is nowhere to be seen, but the seat is soaking wet. She decides to finish the journey to the address and arrives at a house. She knocks on the door and a man answers. She tells him about the woman in white and how she gave her this address and then disappeared. The man said, "You're the 5th person to knock on my door and tell me this story. 5 years ago tonight, my wife and I were sailing on the lake and we had a terrible accident and she drowned. She's been pleading for help ever since. Number 5, the seventh barn. Now, I think that this next one could be great on the silver screen, but not necessarily because of how scary it is, but because you could lean into the investigation angle and how obsession can drive people to do all sorts of crazy things. There was once a wealthy farmer who loved his wife so much that he bought her a heck of a lot of land as a wedding present. When they had a child, the husband decided to celebrate the occasion by building a barn and putting a plaque on it with their name. Every time the man and his wife had a child, he did this, and eventually they had 6 barns and 6 children, and they were happy. When his wife announced that she was pregnant again, he was overjoyed and began construction on the 7th barn, and the day that he finished, she went into labor. Unfortunately, his wife died in childbirth, and so did their unborn son. Driven mad by grief and heartbreak, the man took the rest of his family out to the 7th barn to bury his wife and son, he told them. But then, he took an axe and killed all of them and hung himself from the rafters. They say if you visit the barn at night, you can see his ghostly figure hanging by his neck, blowing in the wind. And over the years, the land and barns were sold off, all but the 7th, as everyone knew of the tragedy that happened there. But a teacher told his son the scary story, and they decided to try to find the 7th barn. They scoured old maps, toured through the countryside and plains, and finally found what they thought was the 7th barn. It even had the nameplate on the outside, and they headed out there with a video camera to get some paranormal evidence. The next morning, the teacher's wife reported the son and husband missing, and the cops found their car abandoned on the side of the road near a barn. And when they looked inside, they saw their bodies hung by the neck from the rafters, blowing in the wind. Number 4, Knock. Now, making this next one into a feature-length film would be interesting, not necessarily because of the content, but for the lack thereof. This was published in 1948, written by an author named Frederick Brown, and it's not your normal ghost story, but the shortest horror story ever written. To make this a movie, I think you'd have to start long before the events take place and build the world up. It's only 2 sentences, and it goes like this. The last man on earth sat alone at the room. There was a knock on the door. Simple, short, and spooky. Number 3, Lick. One night, a young woman was home alone. Her roommates were out of town for the night, and she had the run of the place. She watched TV and ate junk food all evening, but when the night came, there was a terrible thunderstorm, and despite the fact that she should have grown out of it, she was still afraid of the dark, and the shadows, lightning, and noises in an empty house scared her half to death. Luckily, she had her faithful dog Spot to take care of her, and he curled up next to her on the bed and licked her hand to comfort her, and she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up to a noise, something that was dripping. Maybe some rain was leaking in, or a tap wasn't fully off, but she heard it loud and clear. Drip, drip, drip. The lightning and shadows and sounds scared her, but Spot licked her hand for comfort and she fell back asleep. An hour later, she woke up and heard the noise again. Drip, drip, drip. She wondered if she should go check on it, but she was too frightened from the shadows and the lightning. Spot licked her hand for comfort, and again she fell asleep. She woke 1 more hour later to the same noise. Drip, 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 and this time she gathered her courage and went to investigate. She followed the sound around her house until she realized it was coming from the bathroom, which she must have left the tap on. She opened the door and saw something horrible. Spot was hanging upside down from the shower rod, and he had been skinned. There was still some blood falling from his body, hitting the floor with a drip, drip, drip. Terrified, she ran back to her room to call the police, but inside she saw a note scrawled on the wall in blood, and it said, "Humans can lick too." As someone who grew up with a dog that slept on their bed, this one terrified me, and I'd like to see it on the big screen. Number 2, Red Ribbon. Now this one was probably one of my favorite horror stories growing up, as it was featured in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Although it was a green ribbon, I prefer it with red. I'm not sure if it's the scariest, but there's a lot of stuff that you could take from here to make a pretty compelling movie. Bill loved Sally with all of his heart, common name for horror stories I guess, but there was always something off about her. Even as he fiddled with the engagement ring in his pocket, he thought so. And every day, no matter what, she had a red ribbon tied around her neck. He proposed and she accepted, and later he asked about the ribbon, and she replied with, "Bill, I must never take off my red ribbon, and if you love me, you'll never ask me about it again." And he left it alone. Over the years, he bought her many beautiful outfits, but no matter what she was wearing, even on their wedding day, she wore the red ribbon tied neatly in a bow around her neck. And the question began to eat away at him. On their anniversary, he bought her a beautiful necklace, thinking that she would have to remove the ribbon to wear it, but when he went to remove it so he could put the necklace around her neck, she said, "The necklace is beautiful and she'll treasure it forever, but I must never take off my red ribbon." This angered him slightly, but he let it go. When their baby was born, it was the happiest moment of his life, but the question came back to him when the baby reached his hand towards the thing tied around its mother's neck, and Sally said sweetly to her new baby, "No, Mommy must never take off her red ribbon." Many nights later, the question he was never to ask had burrowed deep into his mind, and it was driving him mad. So while Sally was sleeping, he slowly reached over and pulled at both sides of the bow on the pretty red ribbon. And just as it finally came loose, Sally's eyes opened and her head rolled off of her neck and onto the floor. With a single tear rolling down her cheek, she cried, "I warned you." And finally, number 1, don't turn on the light. I think this one is so scary because for some reason it feels the most realistic, and I can already see the trailer in my head. Miranda and Lucy were roommates and went to school at the local college. One night Lucy comes home and tells Miranda that they've been invited to a big party and that they need to get ready to go. Miranda says she's not feeling well and that she's gonna have a nap on the couch instead. Lucy heads to the party, but halfway through her walk she realizes she's forgotten her keys. Classic Lucy. When she gets back to her apartment, she opens the very creaky door slowly so that she doesn't make too much noise. She can hear steady, slow breaths, so she decides to not turn on the light so she doesn't wake up her sleeping friend. She knows the place like the back of her hand, so it's no problem. She walks through the apartment in the dark, quietly, grabs her keys, and heads back out the door to the party. She dances all night, and later, exhausted, she walks back up the stairs to her apartment and sees the door wide open. She runs inside but can't see anything in the dark, so she flicks the switch on the wall, and when the room brightens, she sees Miranda, mangled and covered in blood in the middle of the floor. Lucy lets out a blood-curdling scream, and then she sees the mirror on the wall, and on it was a message scrawled in Miranda's blood, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?"
Starting off this countdown, we have the cup of ramen noodles. Ever wanted to know what your ramen noodles look like before hot water and delicious seasoning is poured on top of it? Well, now you can. And now, how many of you feel like this is a scam? I thought the whole damn bottom half of the cup was filled, not just a portion of the cup. This literally should be illegal. That and only filling up chip bags halfway. Like, what's up with that? Seriously, I get that ramen is cheap and all, but at least give us poor people more noodles than that. Doubt companies are gonna be too thrilled now that we have learned about this. We're on to you. Moving on at number 9, we have the bloodless heart. So I'm sure all of us know what a human heart looks like, right? I mean, like out of the body. I mean, you should, or else that's kind of concerning. Like, do you not pay attention in school? Anyways, this photo I'm about to show you is what a human heart looks like, completely drained of blood. And I am absolutely speechless. That is not what I was expecting. And honestly, it looks really pretty. Is that weird for me to say? I don't know. At first I was like, oh, that's a piece of raw chicken. And then I was like, oh, no, it's like quartz or a gemstone or something. No, it's a goddamn human heart. Mind blown. Coming in at number 8, we have the big lighters. So I was today years old when I found out that big lighters are just little lighters with an extended point. This literally feels like a scam. When you buy a bigger lighter, you're hoping to get more use out of it. But no, it's just a regular lighter, meaning it has the same amount of lighter fluid, meaning you're paying more and getting the same. I will say it's more handy because it's easier to use and helps me not burn my little fingies, but still, this feels illegal. Just goes to show that size doesn't matter and don't judge a book by its cover or whatever people say, okay? My whole life is a lie now. Coming in at number 7, we have the turtle's mouth. Turtles are really freaking cute, right? And aside from snapping turtles, they're pretty slow and harmless creatures. I personally think turtles are so cute. But this next image completely changed my mind. So this image is the inside of a turtle's mouth. Yeah, you heard me. I have never seen anything that creepy before. I thought I was looking inside of an alien's mouth or something. But nope. Apparently the spikes help trap food to prevent it from coming out of their mouth. But that's why plastic is so dangerous for turtles. If they eat it and realize they can't digest it, it's hard for them to get rid of it because of these alien spikes. It often gets stuck on the spikes, which is really sad. But anyways, next time you see a turtle and you're like, oh my god, they're so cute and innocent, just remind yourself of the evil that lurks in their mouth. I also apologize for all you turtle lovers out there. Sorry. In our 6th spot, we have the unrecognizable objects. Pretty recently, this photo went viral on the internet. Why? Because it disturbed so many viewers. Take a look at this photo and tell me what you see. That's the thing. It's virtually impossible to identify any of the familiar objects. It's wild and leaves you feeling very unsettled. It's like you know what you're seeing, but your brain just can't comprehend it or put a name on it. According to Dr. Frank McAndrew, a psychology professor, he said, and I quote, "Trying to interpret an ambiguous image like this sparks uncertainty, which can lead to feeling creeped out. When a person is unsure if something could be harmful, it's normal to experience a sense of unease. We also can get creeped out by confusing things that press competing buttons in our brain, making it hard for us to categorize or understand what we are looking at." So, there you go. That's why this image is freaking everyone out. I just wish that the poster would come forward and tell us what the hell we're looking at. Like, what is it? I'm not okay. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Flesh Lego Man. So I ruined Turtles for you, now it's time to ruin Lego for you, yay! Now what the actual hell is this? Someone decided to make a Flesh Lego Man? I am deeply disturbed and I have so many questions. The first one being why, the second one being why, and the third being why? So this was created with the help of special effects makeup artist Frank Ippolito and the team at Tested.com. They decided to dress a man up as this terrifying Lego real-life fleshy man and have him hang out at the San Diego Comic-Con. But honestly, we still don't know why they did this, besides wanting to terrify children and make it so I never sleep again. I honestly think the worst part are its hands. It's got Lego claw hands, but has a freaking nasty fingernail. That's a no from me. Coming in at number 4, we have the doll. In 2018, @CatScottLou on Twitter tweeted a picture of this photo and it quickly spread like wildfire. This is a picture of a doll whose face has been removed and then replaced with another doll's face. And apparently this was the works of her little sister, who a lot of people are now concerned for. Apparently she is obsessed with doing this. She has also done this with stuffed animals as well, which is very concerning. That's some Norman Bates, Buffalo Bill, Ed Gein behavior right there. I'd run if I was her. Next thing you know, she's performing these surgeries on real people. Moving on to number 3, we have Feetloaf. And yes, it's as bad as it sounds. Some deranged person decided to, instead of making a traditional meatloaf, to take the meat and form it into a person's foot. The worst part is the onions for the toenails. Okay, so 10 out of 10 for creativity and the name, negative 100 out of 10 for doing this though. I'm sure when it was cooked though, it changed its shape and didn't look as bad, but this is something I just did not need to see today. In fact, meatloaf is bad enough as is. Making it into feet isn't going to make it more enjoyable to eat. Moving on to number 2, we have the unknown figure. This is one image that I wish I could erase from my mind completely. It features an individual hunched over while on their tippy toes and fingers, wearing this creepy mask. What's even scarier is that I have no clue where this image came from. I tried reverse image searching and just found a lot of blogs/posts talking about it, but no one actually knows who posted it or took it or why. This is the definition of a cursed image. So if any of you know the backstory to this photo, please let me know in the comments below so it can stop cursing my sleep. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Antran. While finding pictures for this video, I stumbled upon this nightmarish one. It features a skinny, creepy robot alongside 2 kids. Obviously, I was curious about learning more in hopes to find the origin of this photo and if the robot went on to kill a number of people, but all that popped up was a creepypasta called Antran. The creepypasta goes as so. According to the narrator of the creepypasta, this photo was taken in the 70s and features their son on the left with their robot Antran, who they adopted into their family. This is also the only remaining image they have of their son. So they found this robot at a garbage dump. Someone had tried to throw him away. I wonder why. But they were amazed, so they took him home. In the end, Antran turns evil, torments the family, and eventually kidnaps the son. Now, of course, this is just a creepypasta, but it's wild how I can't even find the source of this image. A lot of people are in the same boat as me. They have been searching for years to no avail. The image is creepy enough on its own. It's even creepier not knowing the photo's backstory. Alright guys, that's all for today's video. Let me know in the comments below which one of these photos creeped you out the most. Honestly, the turtle? Never expected that. And I just, ugh, no thanks.